Good afternoon, everybody, from wet and windy and rainy Brussels, and welcome to this webinar. We are still having some people coming in, and I see the numbers are going up, but I think we can continue with the brief introduction from here in Brussels. My name is Brian Talty, and I'm Policy Officer here at the YERUN Secretariat in Brussels. And I just want to welcome you to this webinar, which is entitled Artificial Intelligence in Open Science, which is held alongside the International Open Access Week, and webinar was developed by the YERUN Group on Open Science. And I just want to say a special thanks to our colleagues in the Open Science Group, Sasha Zelenika, from UNRNI, and Michal Saive from Maastricht University. And also thanks to my colleagues, Gabriela and Mariangela, who have helped throughout the development of this webinar also. Well, what is YERUN for those who don't know? YERUN is the Young European Research Universities Network, which this year is celebrating its 10-year anniversary. We are a network of 24 members from across Europe, from Tromsø in northern Norway to Nicosia on the beautiful island of Cyprus, where in fact we held our General Assembly 10 days ago. YERUN's mission is threefold: to advocate for our universities on a wide range of topics on a European level, to communicate interesting ideas and opportunities, and to provide a platform for collaboration among our members. Now, YERUN has been a champion of open science since shortly after its establishment. Since 2017, YERUN has had an open science working group. We have run the YERUN Open Science Awards also through this group, and this program has recognized and celebrated exceptional contributions to open science within the YERUN community. YERUN was also part of the OPUS project, which is Open Science and Universal Science Project Consortium, where the main goal was to develop coordination and support measures to perform the assessment of research and researchers. More recently, YERUN has been involved in the ever-changing landscape of artificial intelligence and its impact and opportunities also for our institutions. The YERUN Group on AI was established this summer, and this group aims to produce practical, timely opportunities to share challenges and good practices among our members. Now, this 90-minute webinar will be about an hour of panel discussion with our experts here. And then there will be about 20 minutes of question and answers. And as you can see, the Q&A box is open, which should be on your top left. So feel free to share your thoughts and questions throughout the webinar, and we'll pick those up when it comes to the Q&A section near the end. And just a reminder that this webinar will also be recorded. But about AI and open science. AI is rapidly reshaping how universities practice open science by accelerating data sharing, reproducible workflows, and collaborative discovery at scale. When you look at automated metadata generation to AI-assisted literature synthesis and code review, AI enhances the open science landscape by making research outputs more findable, interoperable, and reusable. Crucially, AI also helps bridge the gap between data and knowledge, turning raw data sets into insights for both research and education. Yet, as we all probably know, challenges remain, particularly around equitable access to these opportunities and questions of data, sovereignty, governance, control, which universities must address through thoughtful policy, infrastructure, and community norms. Additionally, the diversity of disciplines speaking and attending today reflects the interests and applicability of artificial intelligence in open science. I think it's safe to say AI is not just for data scientists, and equally conversations about open science are not just for librarians. But with this in mind, I'd like to introduce our panel of expert speakers. We have Anna Mestrovic, full professor from the Faculty of Informatics and Digital Technologies at the University of Rijeka. We have Jerry Spanakis, assistant professor in machine learning, natural language processing at Maastricht University. We have Lars-Eilo Bongo, professor in health technology at the Department of Computer Science, UiT, the Arctic University of Norway. And we have Eva Melonchechak Zlody, Senior Open Science and Scholarly Communications Librarian at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Zagreb. So I just want to thank all our speakers and everybody in attendance for being here this afternoon for this very timely webinar. But yeah, maybe I'd just like to open things with a question to Eva. So with your experience as a librarian and leader in open science and an expert in all these things, maybe you could set the scene in simple terms for us about how does AI in open science, or what does it mean, AI in open science for researchers and librarians right now, and what's maybe truly new in the area, and what's just a new label that has already been on existing things or old issues. So if you don't mind.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And I will start, as you intended, very broadly to speak about these two phenomenon. And it's often when we think about open science and AI, we think about like, okay, like open science was once a new thing, and now we have an artificial intelligence, which is the next new thing. And we think of two phenomena that are changing the research landscape very profoundly and very rapidly, but they are in a way not the same types of phenomenon. So I think that this distinction is something that we need to keep in mind. So open science was from the start conceived, and it still is a reform agenda, a reform movement to change the way that research is thought of and performed. And it had very clear, even ideological goals. So one was to definitely make research more accessible and inclusive, and at the same time more transparent and more ethically rigorous. So these were very clear goals from the start. Of course, now after at least 2 decades of pushing for open science and entering the mature phase of it, we can see some of the unintended consequences maybe. So where once were inequalities in access to knowledge, now we can see some economical inequalities in access to being published, for instance. So these are some things that now we have to think of new solutions to new problems in a way. And here comes the AI. And with that, we have some new opportunities. So AI is not a reform movement. It's basically a technological development that has been going on for a very long time. But since few years ago, it had a very rapid impact on the way we do everyday research. And now we can use it in different ways. And in relation to open science, we can see that it can help us actually overcome some of these barriers and some of these unintended consequences of the way open science was performed in a way. Especially with overcoming some language and accessibility barriers, in connecting open data, making science more inclusive. So this is a good thing that can be seen, but it can also amplify some negative trends in open science, especially related to the explosion of research outputs and to introducing some gray zones between acceptable and unacceptable research behavior. So it's not about whether we use AI or not. We definitely need to do that, but it's important to keep a critical eye on both the deployment of AI, but also to rethink the principles of open science. But not just that, it's also about thinking about those things in a very practical ways, thinking of practical solution, pragmatic actions. And this is where I'm very happy to hear what the next panelists, who are very rooted in research and teaching, will have to say about this.
Super. Thank you. I think you're dead right there that we need to I think the use of AI is non-negotiable, but we also just need to be aware of those challenges or those risks that are there. And I think we're maybe doing a good enough job so far, but we still need to keep an eye on the new things that are coming up. But with this in mind, I'm going to turn to Jerry Spanakis from the University of Maastricht next. And with your background in machine learning and natural language processing, but related to more the legal and tech side of things, and also your work on bias and responsible deployment. But from your work on this, what's maybe a basic way or a more plain English checklist a university should perhaps use now when turning on an AI tool for all across the university for research, student support, review support. And maybe you could give one example from your legal tech background that shows that these kind of checklists can work or maybe not even work in action.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for the introduction, and thanks to everybody for being here today. I think it's a large turnout, which only shows the interest in the topic. So my background is purely technical, but I have been, growing up since a student, focusing on open source, as we called back then the open science. So I think I'd always been rooted into providing open access resources. And of course, when it comes to artificial intelligence, there's much discussion about the impact it's going to have on our everyday activities. And here, there are two things that I would like to mention before I talk about some examples, is that as you and Eva said, is like the discussion is not about if we're going to use AI, because we are using it. And it's not just us, right? So the number I usually throw here is that, for example, ChatGPT, which revolutionized the generative models, needed just 2 months to reach 500 million users, right? Which is a huge number. By itself doesn't say much, but if we compare, for example, to Google Translate, which is a tool that has been developed like first time, I think, over 20 years ago, it needed more than 6 years to reach the same amount of users. And of course, it's a tool that today everybody is using. So we're talking about the type of technology that has already made it to our daily lives. And by our daily lives, I don't mean just our, circle of academia, but like also everyday people. The second dimension I want to talk about is this type of technology, which is evolving as we speak, right? So the speed of which these models are being developed and then put into deployment has really shortened compared to what was in the past, right? So we're talking about models that might be developed as we speak, and we might have them next week or something. And that has not been the case in the past. So we need to acknowledge this, that we're talking about a set of tools that they're going to be evolving, they're going to become better, and at the same time, they're going to be adjusting to our needs and vice versa. Now, this was a bit like, what we're dealing with in a way. So as you mentioned, I've been working on machine learning and natural language processing also with many applications in different domains. One of them is the legal domain. So we've been looking at all kinds of legal applications and building useful tools, let's say. So there are different checklists that need to be implemented. And something that also is not being maybe acknowledged enough is that this is not just a one-off checklist that we do and then the model is going into production and that's it, right? So we're talking about checklists going already from the planning of any kind of project or any kind of tool, then to the development, and then to the whole development, to the deployment and the life cycle of the application and the tooling. Why am I mentioning this? Because like also in my line of research, my line of business, there are many colleagues, many researchers, many companies coming to my office and tell me, I want to use AI for this, this, and that. And then my number one question is that, do you really want to use it, right? Or do you really need to use it? So what does it going to do that perhaps it's doing it differently or better than what you're doing right now? Which I think is the number one question, right? It's like, what exactly are we replacing and for which purpose, or if we are assisting humans, right? We do have solid frameworks, especially in open science projects that are working. There is no need to put AI there. And then again, borrowing from my work examples, right? We've been working a lot on checking the robustness of these models, meaning that What happens if we change a bit the input and then do we get the same output? Is there some consistency in the output, and how this is going to be handled? Another dimension also I've been working on is the multilinguality. Of course, here we all speak English, but not everybody does. I am Greek, I am residing in the Netherlands, so we're doing also much work on exploring how these models respond to other languages. We shouldn't forget that these models have been developed primarily for English and with English language data, but that's not the end use, right? If we think about also less developed countries and their access to these resources, it's quite limited still. So we've been doing also some work about checking robustness and bias of these models in Dutch language, specifically for gender bias and also bias towards LGBTQI plus individuals. And perhaps also the big thing, which is also very important to mention here, also related to open science, is that we're talking about these models and these development tools. And one of the important things to take into account is that where did the data the model was trained on come from, right? Who is represented perhaps? What is missing? And how does it affect the development application of the model? And finally, and I will just leave it there for now, is like the whole concept of the, let's say, explainability and the transparency. Here I can use some examples we built, for example, applications in the legal question answering domain, where, of course, we're talking about access to justice and how to make these tools available for everyday people. What we've been really poking, let's say, the models to do is not just provide an answer, which we cannot check, but like explain their reasoning and also their sources in a way that they can also let the users be informed, and also how they can interact further with the model, validate the sources, and move on. So I think these are some starting pointers. I'm happy to elaborate further, but for now, I'm going to leave it at that.
Super. Thank you, Jerry. I think it's safe to say, that bias and transparency are the two, maybe there are other ones, but there are two of the issues that come straight to mind when people think about artificial intelligence and how to use it. But also, maybe also when I turn to Lars Eilhoff for the next question from the University of Northern Norway and Tromsø, about that biases and transparency are very related to the field you work in health sciences as well. But if I do turn to you, when it comes to sensitive data and using sensitive data around AI, you can't just have an open data set when it comes to these things. People are protective of their health data, and rightly so. I think we can all agree. But if we look at any of the practical recipes that you've seen recently for sharing methods and results openly, so that others can learn and verify from the data, but also keeping that patient data protected. So it's trying to strike that balance between enhancing artificial intelligence, but also protecting data. Could you speak a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, thank you. So in my research group, we rely on open access data and open access or open source code to basically do our AI research. I will give some examples about how we do these things and how we try to give back to the community by doing our science as open as possible. And we also do this. We do this, of course, in the research project, but we also have some commercialization projects. We also have tried to actually combine sort of commercial interest and open science, and I think we managed somewhat successfully to do that. And I will focus on maybe like the 4 artifacts that are in AI, which is the data, the annotation of data, source code, and the AI models. And typically when we talk about open science, and the question is that can this data be anonymized so we can actually make it an open access data set? And this question, it's a bit controversial because it's very hard to say when is something well enough anonymized or not. So, but I'll just like assume that it is something that is sort of, it's not possible to identify someone with reasonable means. So we start with the data part. So I'm assuming data is some kind of instrument output, like an image or sound recording or something like that. And then how difficult it is to anonymize, it really depends on the data type. Some are really easy, like if you just have images of cells like we do in computational pathology, that's like the image itself is typically very easy to anonymize since you can't identify someone based on their cells. But if it's a voice recording, then it's much harder because like the voice in itself is identifying. And I'm just going to post something in the chat, which is the link to this paper and also some of the other things I may mention in my answer. And so if like you can't anonymize the data, there's still opportunities. Like it is possible to make the data sort of typically available upon a reasonable request. And there are some that do this like quite well, like European Phenome Archive, EGA. They have a sort of whole setup for publishing really sensitive data, not open access, but still sort of accessible to researchers. In Tromsø, we have something called the Tromsø-undersøkelsen, which is sort of a local thing that does this thing and make data accessible upon a reasonable research. And also research groups themselves, they may also make their own data accessible. How well this works, it really depends. Like it really depends on the people that made the data, like how accessible they are and how willing they are to share. And here, I think that there are two issues. One is like who dares to give the permission to open access a data set. This is often a struggle we have. Like we would like to make it, but we need someone to give permission. That this is something, especially sort of the leaderships, I may not really be wanting or interested in taking the responsibility for that. And then like maybe for the benefit of Eva and others, like spending enough time to make the metadata for the data set that are open access is also like a big important topic. And I provide a link in the chat to one of our examples, the UAT TIL data set, where I think we did this thing really well. And then we did a survey of like what is available of open access data for breast cancer. And just to quickly summarize the result, we found that there are basically two data sets that most papers used in this field, one American and one sort of a competition type of data set. And a bunch of papers has some private data set that sort of was not open access, or many actually didn't even describe properly like what data they used. And I think this has very scary implications, is that many of the data sets or many of the AI models built on this competition data set tend to be very overfit to that. They may work very well for that data set, but not sort of work well for others. And like if there is just an American research like the TCGA, then it's like not a diverse data set. And then we have the annotations, which sort of tell something about the images or sounds. These are sort of what makes the data useful. It really depends on how easy it is to open access. If it's about persons or something that's very easy personalizable, like identify someone, then it's really hard. But I think that this is also like a thing that the science community can do, that we can make new annotations and make also open access them. And ENA is a good example of how this can be done well. And then the third type of artifact is the source code. So this is actually, it's usually not sensitive. So it is like relatively, like there are no legal issues to open source, but then based on commercial concerns, but that can be handled by being a bit clever. And then the fourth artifacts are the models themselves. This would be sort of what you can think of as the brain in AI. And you can think of this like it is some kind of statistical summary of the data that went into training the model. So it's often unproblematic to open access because it is like very easy. So it is anonymized. But there are two issues that I have seen. So one is this model that is used as a medical device? If so, then especially companies are very sort of reluctant to open access the model because they're basically, I guess, afraid of being sued by someone. And now recently we have the large models, like large language models or other foundational models that may remember everything they have seen in a data set because they are so big, and then maybe this sort of statistical summary and thereby animals will not hold anymore. So just to end up with a question, so I think it will be very, very exciting to see like how these foundation models and open science practices will work together in the future. Thank you.
Super, thank you. I think the old adage, one size does not fit all, is certainly true in relation to this as well. But Anna, if you don't mind, I'll turn to you next. But just thinking about your background in semantics technologies and knowledge graphs, and both dealing with EU and national AI initiatives. Do you mind drawing on your experience with knowledge graphs work, where what's one maybe realistic way libraries can begin using knowledge graphs and large language models together, or prepare for that integration in the future to make repository discovery more intelligent and trustworthy?
Yes, thank you for introducing me. I will continue with what Lars mentioned before me, and this is large language models and foundation models in general. This is this whole new world of generative artificial intelligence which we have in last few years, and this is the main technology that actually made things move faster than ever before. I mean, in science and in technology in general. And large language models, as we know, are specific. They can make some kind of AI assistants which can understand the language, and we are all somehow impressed with this aspects of AI agents today, but also they come with many drawbacks, and we know that there are many hallucination and bias within large language models, and this is where knowledge graphs and some knowledge databases can help in order to reduce the hallucination of large language models. But and this is maybe one point how libraries can also improve using large language models. This is only one way and one aspect, maybe promising direction in developing of AI assistants in libraries and in many other domains, which can, with help of knowledge graphs, improve the knowledge of large language models, because large language models can understand and generate the language, but sometimes it has no information, and information should be stored in some kind of knowledge database, and knowledge graphs are a good representation model of knowledge, and that is why they are often mentioned and as potential repositories. This is called the retrieval augmented generation approach and technology, in which we have this large language model as a generator of text and language, and also knowledge base which have correct facts and knowledge about the domain. So in libraries, this domain can be related to publications, and libraries could maybe build trustworthy knowledge graphs that can describe the content of their repositories, for instance, graphs of links, publications, authors, research topics, categories, or something similar. And also this knowledge bases can be linked with texts, with also web pages, but it's important to have trustworthy knowledge sources to build this knowledge base, which can then reduce hallucination of large language models. So for example, for libraries, the benefit is twofold. First, libraries improve the discoverability of their collections through semantic relationships rather than keyword matching. I mean, these knowledge graphs offer some advanced techniques for searching the repository, and also they can create open, verifiable data sets that in future can be used by other AI systems, not just one built by for a single use. So to conclude, I think that today with generative AI, it's very important to have this open science agenda and initiatives more than ever before, because we need this how to say, trustworthy science, because as I mentioned, hallucination. One drawback of generative AI is that it can generate a lot of disinformation, misinformation, and hallucination and fake news. So that is one of major problems of generative AI. So thank you for this.
Thank you, Anna. And I think building on that question, I think Eva, I think we can talk about even the practicalities of building on what Anna has said there. But when it comes to books and journals and other resources, what are some concrete steps that editors and, of course, librarians can take in the short term to make this content, let's call it AI ready, like easy to find, cite, and learn from, without losing that author's control or that authorship control?
Okay. Yes, thank you for the question. And I would like to stress 3 points. And one of those points is very much building on what Anna talked about, actually. So thank you for this input. The first thing is, though, something related to language. So I would like to talk about the linguistic aspect, the technical, and the legal in the end. So the linguistic bit is that what we see in the publications today is having, well, since more and more authors are using AI and large language models to write or to assist them in writing, we also see a type of linguistic blendness or uniformness that is happening around us. And this is, well, especially for me coming from the social sciences and humanities background, this is definitely not a welcome effect. So editors and journals should try to strive to fight against that and influence their authors to still write in a proper natural language and use so keeping their linguistic specifics, but also epistemic and cultural values in their text. But at the same time, we must understand that today readers and users of research publications are approaching them often in a very different way. So not just finding a publication and read it, but more and more they are using discovery systems, translation systems, or summary systems that are assisted by AI. And we have to acknowledge that. And especially if we are writing in non-English languages, so then it's very useful to have at least bibliographical metadata, so titles, abstracts, keywords written in a plain English language, well-structured, so they are in a way AI friendly, and that it will be easier for users to find them and understand them. So that's one part of the answer, to keep the linguistic and cultural diversity, but at the same time make your content more discoverable and understandable. And the other thing is related to this, what Anna talked about. So we usually now face these large language models that deal with text, but especially in the future, and now already we see some kind of discovery systems that are using proper metadata and some expert system to guide them. So it's definitely worth for libraries to keep building the quality curated metadata that will enable some sort of ontologies and knowledge graphs, and especially to use, we call them persistent identifiers, so DOIs, ORCIDs, RORs. So these are very important bits that will make these AI discovery systems more reliable. And finally, with the legal issue, so we often think of AI, especially big tech companies, of users of knowledge that is produced elsewhere. But of course, not a lot of AI systems and the way it's used is built within the research system or in public-private partnerships or for specific domains for very valid purposes. So we want to make our knowledge available to all of them, and being very clear about the legal terms of use, using as much of open licenses, so CC BY or for data CC 0 whenever that's possible. That's something that will make the life for people who develop AI systems much easier. So this is also something that's important. So I will end here.
Thank you. Very interesting. Very good answer and very practical ways of moving forward as well. At this point, I'd like to ask anybody in the people to use the question and answer feature as well. So feel free to provide feedback on the fly, and we'll address those after a couple of more questions. But feel free to have your questions in the chat. But next, I'd like to move on to Jerry Spanakis from the Maastricht University, and maybe talk about something a little bit different. So I think many AI tools, if you agree, are black boxes. So what are the minimum levels of openness or explanation you would want before you trust one in a peer review or student support or to search even?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Also because I think there has been maybe too much open washing for some of these models we see nowadays. So I think about, for example, the press releases you see from Meta, for example, whenever they release a new Llama model, Llama 2, Llama 3, and they mention, oh, we now release our newest family of open models. And then every time I see these press releases, I have to roll my eyes just because their models are not really open. And what is the lowdown here is that openness, right, is not something binary. You cannot say that a model is open or closed in that sense, like black box or white box or anything. But we are talking about openness as something, gradient, right, which is also multifaceted. So when we talk about these models, of course, there is the code, which is like the open source, and then we talk about open code availability of code. We talk about open data. Sometimes we talk about open weights, which means that we don't have exactly access to the whole model, but we might have access to how the model will produce the output, the word or the images or everything. We talk about licensing. I think also Eva mentioned that, which is also very important. We talk about documentation. So all these things blend into something which cannot really just decide whether this is, let's say, open or not by just saying, binarize it. So in that sense, the answer to the question has been, I think, by a meme, which shows practically this duck going around every time there is a new model, and then we say this is an open model, and then the question is, what is the data it has been trained on, right? So I think that's very essential, because this is the source of all kinds of biases and, in a way, discrimination that might be causing the model. In that sense, we have used some of these models, let's say, even for teaching purposes, where we try to limit, let's say, the answer pool of the model to, let's say, only the course resources, so that can be used for students in order to question, let's say, the material of the course without relying on external sources and so on. And that can be, let's say, very useful in specific applications, since we are talking universities and we are also teaching students. At the same time, what I want to stress in a way is that openness is not like the full solution, let's say, in a way, to all these challenges that are posed by large language models and generative AI in general. Because, let's say, even if data is open, as I mentioned, it will not, let's say, mitigate the effect and the consequences of, let's say, careless deployment, right, of these models, or even, let's say, the shady practices come with copyright implications. We see already many of these lawsuits have to do that. Oh, yeah, maybe we should have trained the model on this. I think what really makes difference here is that what type of openness will make also our research to be exactly possible. Because exactly as I mentioned in my previous statement, we're talking about this type of evolving technology. So it's very important to develop open scholarship with the support, of course, from our libraries and the universities in order to build these reproducible frameworks and workflows to understand what exactly is going wrong with these models, to put in place, checklists and balances, and foster this, culture of responsibility and accountability. So yeah, not really an answer there. I would say if I had to pick something, I would say the data, but I would say in the end, it's like open scholarship, which encompasses our academic identity and what we're doing as universities, which is responsible research.
Super. Thank you, Jerry. Next, I'm going to move to Anna. I know, Anna, I think you advocate for open and responsible use of artificial intelligence society, and obviously you're based in Rijeka in Croatia, and you speak Croatian there. So there's about 6 to 7 million Croatian speakers around the world, because I checked it on OpenAI. But maybe you could talk a little bit about smaller or less resourced languages and how they often maybe get left behind in the development of AI. I know we've already talked about this a little bit, but maybe you could talk about some useful steps that universities can use to make AI work better within these languages that aren't essentially, let's say, English or Mandarin or whatever. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you, Brian. This is a very important question because we really have problems with these smaller or less resourced languages like Croatian and some other languages across Europe, because we know that English is the most dominant language is large language models, although they are multilingual and they can also generate text in Croatian and Slovene and other smaller languages, but there is a real risk of being left behind in the age of artificial intelligence for those small languages. So we need to have some steps and ideas and initiatives to improve large language models for smaller languages. I know that there are several large projects in European Union which are taking care about this small resourced languages. But what can university do to integrate better these languages in the world of AI? Is, for example, it's important to provide this open content text and all other documents and data sets. So to make linguistic, academics, and cultural content available in open and structured and well-documented forms and manners, because university generates a huge amount of valuable text. Theses, research papers, lecture notes, educational materials, and institutional reports. And for example, at the University of Rijeka and also in Croatia, we have these huge repositories for all our research papers and theses. And this is a very valuable corpora, for example, for training the large language models for Croatian language. So I think much of this content exists and it is in machine readable way, so maybe in near future all these documents can be used for training and making a large language model, for example, for the Croatian. And it's even not necessary to train these large language models from scratch. It is possible just to additionally train the existing large language models with large amount of textual data, for example, in Croatian, and then we will have a better large language model so for Croatian language. So I think again here we can see how open science and and these FAIR principles can help us in building a better AI ecosystem in science and in other domains. So that is a short conclusion related to this small languages.
Thank you. But it seems that there are solutions, which is a very good thing out there.
I
They just
think,
have to
yes,
yeah.
I'm also involved in this strategic group for developing AI strategy for Croatia, and we have discussed a lot about this large language model for creation. And for example, in Slovenia, they have already this initiative. They built their own large language model, and that's good. That's good because we need to be somehow independent with these small languages also.
And did it work well in Slovenia, or is it still early stages yet to say if it works well?
I think they have progress. I'm reading about their projects, and they're good at that. And I hope that we will follow this way in Croatia.
Something to keep an eye on. Thank you, Anna. But maybe I'll move to Lars Ilo next, because along with your professorship position in the UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, you also have an adjunct professor position at the Sami University of Applied Sciences, where you also recently co-founded the Sami AI Lab, which aims to use AI to improve Sami society for the better. But also along these lines, openness and open science maybe looks different across different communities, and openness also varies by context in the community and even within indigenous communities such as the Sami. But maybe you could walk us through how approaches such as things like CARE, which is, for those who don't know, collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics, and how these approaches are supposed to work. And are these approaches a good thing, or maybe sometimes they can, from on the face, be a bad thing as well?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you, Anna, for giving a good introduction to some of the things I will present. So again, I will post some links in the chat if you want to sort of read up on some of the things I talk about. So, and I also want to maybe do a disclaimer before I start that I haven't been involved in sort of making these CARE principles, or actually sort of I'm not an expert on them. And I'm also very skeptical when it comes to these principles, and I think they are actually more harmful than they will be beneficial for the indigenous people. And I'm indigenous people myself, so I feel I'm somewhat safe in criticizing these. So my understanding of the CARE principles is that they are somehow a reaction to FAIR. In that sort of in the indigenous communities, I think they feared that FAIR is a way of exploiting their sort of indigenous knowledge and data. And when it comes to indigenous people, like all of the rights we have are collective rights. They're not sort of individual. So it's the group that has the right. And this also applies, or it's the thinking should apply to the data, indigenous data, is that it should also be sort of have a collective ownership and collective rights. And just like indigenous people, just to get a little bit back, there are people that don't have a national state of their own, so they need to sort of rely on other bodies. And indigenous people, they have like really most or all have a bad history of exploitation, and including losing like their rights to their land, their intellectual property, and in some cases also the culture. And unfortunately, I think like a lot of this land loss anger has gone into sort of making these care principles. But sort of my point is that data is not the same as land, and you can reuse data without harm. And just to get sort of illustrate or maybe explain my point is sort of why I think these are so harmful is that AI, of course, it needs data, as many has been saying already here. Most people think of AI, then they think of the big sort of ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion and these sort of big models, and they have like a really bad history of like not being very ethical when it comes to collecting the data, maybe not even being always entirely legal when they do it. But another and maybe more important for like people is the AI applications. And the AI applications, they also need data just to tune or even develop or test these AI applications. And when it comes to indigenous people, indigenous cultures, like the big AI models don't work well for the culture. They're not very well represented. So again, so my focus is on the AI application, especially so-called high-risk applications. And these are like the EU AI Act covers these high-risk applications. Those are because they are the ones that will be used in education. They will be used in health and sort of governance. And this is like if they go wrong, then they can actually harm people, like physically, mentally, educational, and so on. And just to illustrate the point, like in adaptive learning, which is maybe one of the things that Indigenous people want, they want better educational tools. One important thing in adaptive learning is cognitive tests. And to make a cognitive test work for a population, you need to norm them to the population, and thereby you need data from that population, like an indigenous data if it's an indigenous population. And then when it comes to this high-risk application, I think like economically, it doesn't really make sense to include all kinds of minorities if you are like a commercial entity producing this test. It's going to cost money and you will not earn on that. So that's why the AI Act has sort of, it's based on a human right principle, which is that people should not be discriminated based on ethnicity or language. But at the same time, the AI Act also has like a really strong data protection for minorities. So it's in practice, there's this legal mismatch about the right to not be discriminated and the right to not have your data misused, which makes it really hard to actually make AI work for these minority populations in practice, I believe. And then when it comes to indigenous people, then the indigenous data is extra complicated due to these collective ownerships. And so we make sort of the licensing, in my opinion, becomes very unclear, and especially if you have a AI project where you not need a lot of data, like in opposing to other projects where you maybe only are interested in 3 or 4 artifacts, images, or something. And it's also this adds sort of an extra layer of bureaucracy, which makes it more difficult to get permissions to do this research on this indigenous minority people, which is already very complicated to get the like ethical and legal rights to do the things of that are needed to both develop and test these high risk and also very useful AI application. And that's why I think like this will end up by hurting indigenous people, like by basically restricting access to the data that is needed to develop these really useful tests. And I think like in the care principles, the issue are in the C and the A. Like the C is the collective benefit. So there's like some representative body that needs to basically determine data access. And this is not just sensitive data, it's like all other indigenous data, like be it sensitive or not. And for the Sami, there are 3 Sami parliaments in Norway, Finland, and Sweden. And there's also Sami in Russia. I don't know who like their representative body is. But like if you want to do a project for all Sami, you need to be in touch with these 3 entities already, or 4. And worse, it takes time. Like many are not really ready to sort of make decisions on the really fast-moving field of AI. So it sort of, there's a lot of like, again, sort of this fear of making decisions. Is better to wait a bit. So like I feel that sort of indigenous people are being left behind in the AI revolution, and this also creates a lot of extra work for researchers. And then the A part is sort of the authority to control. This is like, in my opinion, like there is really no system in place yet. And for me, it's very unclear how does this sort of the authority and the collective rights to data, how do this sort of interact with the open access licenses and the individual data ownership that is often by these open access licenses. And as I said, it will be very messy for big data projects. And I think I spoke long enough, but I have, like if somebody wants to hear about their ethical indigenous AI data project, if you ask one of the questions, I can answer in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Oh, it's fascinating, Lars. A really interesting perspective and point of view. I think a lot of people don't even think about when it comes to artificial intelligence. So I really think it's quite interesting and valued within the attendees as well. But also talking about interesting questions, we haven't yet turned to usually what is the most interesting and dirty question when it comes to open science, and it's about funding and money. So Eva, if you don't mind taking up this question. Funding can be usually short term, we know, and especially with the changing landscape of AI. But maybe you could discuss what model do you see actually sustaining open journals and books, especially maybe if you can discuss about smaller languages once again, and what should funders do to make it stick?
Okay, so thanks for the question. and for the introduction from Anna from her answer. So yes, the truth is that the sustainability question is one that hasn't yet been answered in a satisfactory way in the open access community, and it's still something that's open. There will probably be, so there will not be one solution that will work for all situations and all context, but one thing that I've picked to talk about, and this is definitely showing my bias because I have been involved with the diamond models for a very long time. And I believe that especially in this context of smaller languages and smaller countries and cultures, this is the model that is probably without alternative, because there is no there is no way that paywalls, for instance, will work for publications with a very small number of readers, potential readers, or that APCs, they could work, but they are not then the fair model, and they will again exclude the same authors that they are trying to serve. So for us, the diamond model is probably the best solution, but then we have an issue of how to sustain it. And this is clearly something that will have to rely on the public money. So, but maybe just one remark before turning to funders, is that, as Anna said, there is a clear benefit of having open publications for the development of AI, but then the argument goes vice versa. Publication in smaller languages will benefit from the additional layer of discovery that is provided by the AI. So the potential impact and potential visibility will actually grow with the AI. And this is another argument why open access is good for us. And when it comes to funders and institutions, so the answer is probably twofold. So one is how to make the daily operations of publishers, smaller publishers, editors, sustainable. So provide them with enough funds to develop, not necessarily to grow in volume, but simply to develop technologically and with relation to publishing standards, but also to keep up with their operational costs. So providing some sort of mechanisms that are periodical and regular, and that require a certain quality of publication. So this is something that is definitely beneficial. We can see, for instance, in Norway, some mechanism that work like that. And the other thing is funding infrastructures that are long-term sustainable and that are community governed, and that will serve many and not just one publisher. So this is another side of the same coin. So building this type of infrastructure and support is also something very important. And I can only mention that this is not, so these things that we talk about, they are not very abstract. We already have, even in Europe, countries where we have such infrastructures in place. So I don't know, Finland or Croatia being among them. And we have examples that this could work. And also what is happening right now is this pan-European movement of building its so-called European Diamond Capacity Hub that will also support the smaller national capacity centers that will then provide support for this. So this will require some funding from our research funders and from the institutions and ministries. But I think that in light of these old developments, this is something worth investing in. So thank you.
Thank you, Eva. If anybody has anything else to say on funding, please feel free to open your mic as well. But if not, we can maybe just take a look at the chat very quickly, because I think there's a couple of questions inside there. And anybody who's willing to answer, feel free to. But maybe we can take the first question from Yannis. He says that the technical aspects of artificial intelligence around result accuracy and metadata quality, hallucinations, personal data privacy, etc., are indeed very important. However, do we as education institutions, how should we deal with further ethical issues such as illegal harvest of copyrighted materials to train AI models provided by companies with university contracts such as Microsoft, but also environmental impacts, which is something we actually haven't discussed today. But is there anybody who would like to take these questions? Don't be shy.
I can make a start.
Cheers, Jerry. Thanks.
Yeah, also because I mean, there's another question about an open letter in the Netherlands to stop the uncritical adoption of AI technologies. I'll try to synthesize the answer because I think these are kind of related topics. And I think also they are related to something else, which is an ongoing discussion, I think, in the Netherlands and maybe across Europe, is that the whole reliance of universities on, big technology for supporting our infrastructure, but also our operations. There are big companies like Microsoft that we depend on our mailboxes and even for more services like Copilot and other things. And I think you cannot disentangle this from the whole policy on how we look things in the future and what kind of, I would say usually what kind of IT support we want for our universities and how that's going to depend. So I think the whole discussion of, I would say, uncritical adoption, which sounds a bit, let's say, negative in that sense, it's related also to, where are we seeing our universities go with, keep relying and maybe locked in on services like, let's say, Microsoft, just as an example, right? Other universities might have other services and so on. What I want to mention here about the illegal, let's say, materials and copyright, I think we had these issues before, right? For example, I do remember vividly with research projects where you had to start storing things in the cloud. And then people realized that the cloud is not the cloud, right? It's just somebody else's computer. And of course, there were specific agreements that if it's data from Europe, you cannot store them in servers in Colorado. And somehow that was solved, again, doing due diligence in this contract. So I think that, here we can cite the research integrity principles that we follow as universities and enforce these contract clauses. And for the environmental impact, I think that there are two things to look at here. One is that, of course, first of all, we're talking about exactly big models, right? We call them foundation models or, large language models for a reason. At the same time, they called like that because exactly they're going to be reused, right? So even if we are building these models, there is going to be the concept of reuse so that I don't need to train locally, let's say, a model from scratch, but I can take it and fine tune it. Of course, right, we're talking about a huge environmental impact here. I think that, we don't have the answer yet just because these technologies are still being developed, as I mentioned, and we haven't still plateaued in the returns we have from building models. So bigger models seem to be producing, let's say, better results. But I think also looking forward, I think we're going to see more and more here. And I think as universities also, right, because we don't have access to all these resources, right, as an active researcher in the field, we have to, compete with, let's say, companies that they do the same research with 100 GPUs. And then we have to share among the colleagues like 2 or 3 of them, and we fight over our deadlines to see who's going to do. So, so in the sense also talking a bit about the letter, I think if you read it, they don't mention something that somebody would disagree, that as universities, we aim to provide this critical education, both for our staff and students. That's what we do. And I think nobody disagrees with that as a principle. But at the same time, right, how we're going to operationalize, let's say, banning the use of AI technologies in that sense. So I think there are some good thoughts there, but the implementation is a bit more tricky. And we're going to see more in the future.
Thanks, Jerry. I saw you nodding along there, Anna. Do you have anything to add or?
Yes, I just wanted, I completely agree with Jerry. These are the possible problems, and it should be somehow take look of all these possibilities that Jerry mentioned.
Big area indeed. But maybe I'd like to just spin on a topic if none of you want to answer one of the Q&A questions. I had, Lars, I know,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, maybe I can follow up to sort of the first question, like should universities take responsibility for more ethical AI? Yes, definitely. And I think like especially Europe has a role when it comes to DEI, which seems to be under attack from like the big AI nations like US and China. And I'm especially sort of interested in inclusive AI that includes sort of really minorities, the really small minorities, which is something that is not commercially interesting. And this is like an area where the universities need to take responsibility. And just like for our own university, like UIT, like there is probably no other entity that can make the Sami AI technology than UIT. So this is something that we must take responsibility for.
Thank you. I remind our attendees that the Q&A is open, so feel free to ask more questions if you wish. I'd like
Can
to
I
ask
also say something about the, because
Jerry,
there was another question,
please.
right, about
Yeah.
the linguistic bias, right, which I think it's very important because I think we touched a bit upon it, right? And I think because you mentioned just, okay, of course, diverse English dialects, and I think this is interesting because I guess if you followed the news, I think it was in the news last year or so that fine-tuning of ChatGPT and let's say the confirmation of the answers of the models, they was outsourced somehow in Nigeria because they were like cheap work rates. So you can see all kinds of bias and discrimination in action for validating the systems. And this was the reason that, for example, like words like delve instead of analyze or something, they made it, they boomed in research papers just because we don't even go to the American English, we might go to Nigerian English just because the validation of these models happened through, again, this kind of discriminatory and biased framework. But what I want to say here is that this is why it's very important to, again, for universities to do all this kind of research, not just on English, right? And I think that this comes, I think, again, as a good initiative from, I would say, many countries, but also like to build their own, in a way, large language models. The Netherlands is doing it with GPT-NL. I think the process is in training. There have been more initiatives on this. And also what is very important to do here is also like exactly research on different dialects. So take into account dialects not only as a variation, let's say, in the input, but also in the output. So how do you produce, let's say, text in different dialects? Again, speaking from experience, in the Maastricht area, there is the Limburgs, the very, very specific dialect, which is even different like every village you go. And then we try to set up a nice small research project, and then practically people were telling me that, we don't have a standard form to write it. And I was like, okay, how are we going to build such a system if we don't know, if the speakers don't know how to write it? And of course, we go back to, this is spoken. So instead of just writing, we take into account also other modalities like audio. So I think here it's very important also for universities to do more research on local dialects and other languages than English. And I think we're going to see more as well in this field as we go forward.
Thanks, Jerry. Anna, I see your hand up, please.
Yeah, thank you. Regarding the dialects, yes, we actually performed one research 1 year ago. We were focused on Croatian dialects, and we tried to employ ChatGPT to perform some NLP task related to recognizing what is a consequence of some sentences. It was a kind of competition for one research paper, and we managed to incorporate dialects, specific dialects in Croatia. One is from Dalmatia, the one from here, from my replace the Kvarner, and also there are also some Slovenian dialect and Macedonian. And I wanted to say that it's possible to use this large language model again with some external knowledge. We have dictionary of dialects, and then in that case, large language model can understand this dictionary and incorporate knowledge about with this dialect. And we our results show that it is possible to improve large language model with external knowledge about dialect. So it's important and it's possible. And yes, of course, at the university, we need to perform this kind of research, because maybe this is a part of research that can be performed within academy, maybe not other industries, not maybe so interested in this specific kind of research because it's not so money in it, or I don't know, but it's important.
Important. I think it also relates to, Lars, I know your point about inclusion and diversity, because if people do have a certain dialect or a certain way of speaking, they might feel a bit left behind or left outside of the norm that has become just from the use of large language models. And even on a practical point, I think a lot of people are using the M dash in English. They now call it the ChatGPT dash because ChatGPT uses it so much.
Yes, I know.
It's really interesting just to see how it's changed people, even what they're calling a piece of punctuation. Or if I
Yes.
see recognize with a Z, I know a lot of the time maybe
I
somebody
remove
is
that
Yes.
when I get this answer from ChatGPT, and I remove. I need to structure my answer or my text different from ChatGPT. It's annoying. This dash.
Maybe I'll ask, and I encourage people to use the chat once again, but I'm going to ask a question maybe about your teaching experience as well. It's a little bit off topic here. I think I had it for Anna originally, but feel free anybody to jump in and talk about it. But how do you encourage students to use AI openly? Because I think we're gone beyond the stage now where we're like, students can't use AI, because you're kidding yourself if you say that to yourself.
No.
But also making sure that students use AI, but in an effective way, and that doesn't replace their own thinking either. Maybe Anna, you want to open, and then we can pass it on. But feel free to go ahead.
Yes, I will start shortly. Yes, we have this problem. I mean, we don't want to discourage students in using AI. Actually, we want to encourage them to use AI, but with a certain aspect of how to say ethical usage in mind, and it's very important. But we have some interesting, I mean, task in which we can allow students to use the AI, but then for their projects, but then they need to explain how to use the AI, and they also need to show their own thinking and approach to the problem. And today is also for us in information science and informatics is also a big problem, because this generative AI can generate the code, and the students don't need to program alone. But again, for example, we have these exams in the classroom, and in this task, they are not allowed to use generative AI, because we want them to understand and to know how to program. And later, when they are at the second year of master degree, they may use AI for helping them in generate program code, but they need to understand and to explain what they were doing in this project. So this is step by step. First, they are not allowed to use AI, and after they are allowed to use the help of generative AI. But at the University of Rijeka, we have this also policy about ethical usage of AI, which said that we want to encourage students and professors in usage AI tools, but also with having in mind this ethical approach. So I think that's the only way right now.
Thank you, Anna. Anybody else would like to jump in on that, maybe? Feel free to open your mic. Jerry, please. Oh,
Yeah,
I saw Jerry first, and then Lizalo, I'll get to you if that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, I start with a joke because I think I'm preparing my syllabus for my course starting in the next semester. And I think the new thing I put is that if you send me an email, don't put it on ChatGPT, just send me what you wanted to put on ChatGPT so as to know what the original intention, because exactly, right, students just use it for all kinds of things. I think here also, right, of course, every university, and I think even in Maastricht, right, there is a general framework and then even some faculty-specific policies. But I think we need to be pragmatic in a way and acknowledge that, yeah, as a colleague says, students live in these tools or something, and they are constantly using them. So I think, going back a bit to, what are we doing at the university is important, and stress to the students the importance of developing this critical attitude. In a way, also, what have we been at least experimenting with also with different colleagues is to, adapt the assessment forms of different courses, because exactly as Anna mentioned, right, I have these assignments, which I was very proud of building. And now if you put them on one of these tools, they just spit out the code, they spit out beautiful graphs and everything. But like if you adjust the form that, we don't need to produce, let's say, a report or something, but a presentation or a video targeted for this specific audience, then you force the students to actually think more critically about what they are producing. But at the same time, what I want to mention is that I think we are kind of in a maybe big experiment, in the sense that the maybe current student generation, they have been using ChatGPT quite a lot, and maybe that happened quite fast. So I think we might still have a few years till we see also what is the feedback of the market, right? Because as universities, of course, we produce graduates, they make it to research, they make it to the industry. And I think it might be a few years till we get some feedback at, what have you been doing, right, at the university? Why you let them, develop or not develop any kind of critical abilities? But yeah, this is my experience.
Lizalo, please.
Yeah, so I may have a bit of different perspectives. So my worry is basically that the sort of the students and also like the pupils that are becoming students are not sort of using AI enough, or that they're using it wrong. I do a lot of outreach activities, including in high schools and elementary schools. And like it's about AI, so I usually start sort of at some point asking like, who here uses sort of ChatGPT or AI tools? And I noticed that the students or the high school students, they become really nervous when I ask that question. They often look at the teacher and then like, do I really dare saying that I use it? Because what I'm actually asking is, do you cheat using ChatGPT? And I think that's really dangerous, that this is sort of the attitude that the students come with to the universities, that using AI is cheating. And that's not going to be helpful in the long run. And when it comes to sort of what we do, or what I personally, I teach a course in computer architecture, where I have like one of the assignments is sort of you have to use AI to help you write the report. But that's a course that is well suited for that. Those that are teaching the elementary sort of introduction to programming courses, they have a lot of issues with actually the students just like using AI to write the code, and thereby not learning the sort of the debugging and that things which is sort of necessary in order to actually know how to program. Yes.
Question of do you use AI being do you cheat isn't just for students or kids either. I think there are a lot of adults who are like a bit questioning themselves when if somebody asks them do you use AI. Big kids, they feel like they maybe are cheating, or which is a crazy way of thinking, but I don't think it's just restricted to children or students either. Eva, please.
So well, my main work is not being a teacher, but I do teach some basics of academic literacy at the faculty, and I have a very similar experience to what Lars just explained. So again, when you ask students whether they use ChatGPT, then they look at their professor, and they are very shy in admitting they do. But it's also for us teaching this techniques of searching the literature. This has become really very difficult in the last, I don't know, 2 years, because either we have to acknowledge that our old techniques are now quite outdated, and that teaching students how to, I don't know, make phrases with Boolean operators and the proper syntax is really weird, because we know they will not use it. So we at least try to teach them, or to explain that they, instead of ChatGPT, they could use some discovery systems that are not hallucinating. So to turn to, I don't know, specialist discovery systems like Elicit Site or something like that, and to do a proper research. Although this is quite difficult, because in the old discovery systems, they were not black boxes. So when we performed a search through the literature, we knew what the results will we get. And now we use the natural language, and basically we have a black box with the results that are real references, but we don't know exactly how we got them. So this is one place of teaching that became quite, different than before in any way.
Thank you, Eva. I think Konstantinos kind of summed it up a little bit in the chat there as well. Students need concise and clear guidelines on the use of AI in universities, so they know how and when to use it. I think we can all kind of agree with that. But also, there's a little bit of experimentation. I think students were maybe the early on-takers of AI, and maybe even the early teachers of the artificial intelligence. Let's take ChatGPT for an example. I think a lot of students used it early on, and that maybe helped it then maybe in the future also become maybe a better language model, large language model. But that's just a side point though as well. We're coming up to 21 past, so I might have a final question for all of you, and we'll do a final wrap up round. And usual, this is like the wish for the future question, as they're usually called. And this is a safe space here. There's nobody online, so just ignore that number up there on the top left that says how many people are watching. But if you could change one thing in your university policy in the next semester, let's say, to improve AI openness and integrity, what would that be? I'm going to go to Lars Ilo on this first. Sorry, Lars Ilo.
No problem. I'm actually in one of those sort of groups that are working on the AI policies for the universities. So I think this maybe reflect a bit sort of my sort of research and personal interest, but I'm really trying to push sort of this inclusiveness in AI, in that when we as sort of a university start using this AI tools, that we have some ethical principles that are sort of base the foundation of what type of tools we choose. And we can also then put pressures when we buy new tools that they should be inclusive and respect sort of the things that we think are important to respect. So I guess inclusive AI is the short answer.
Thank you. Eva, I'll go to you next, if that's okay.
Okay, so I'm not sure what I would change in the policy, but I would definitely like to have more change in the awareness and the attitude of our researchers. So not to use AI with a sort of a concealment, but to be honest and open about it, and take it more as a friend, as a helper, than as a threat. So something like that.
Thank you, Eva. Jerry, I'll go to you next.
I would like to say more funding, but I mean that's always the case of universities. But what I would say also, like in the concept that in the Netherlands, right, we're trying to implement this rewards and recognition scheme where exactly academics are let's say, rewarded exactly based on their whole set of activities. And there's also the idea that we should recognize more work on open scholarship. Open science is one of the pillars there. And I think the question is, okay, how do we operationalize that, right? So what I want to say is that, for example, right now, if you do some really, open data work and then you publish the data set, but without, let's say, publication, but there is still a data set documented very well, that has not, let's say, found its way that, this is a concrete output which is going to be recognized because maybe there is no paper attached to it. So I think I would like to see this change in mentality, which is going to be incorporated also in the rewards and recognition scheme, which also covers as well, societal impact in a way, right? We want to measure societal impact. And what's better than exactly developing also inclusive AI as Lars mentioned, but also like AI awareness and AI literacy for the society, which is like, again, important pillars that everybody wants to incorporate into this rewards recognition scheme, but we still haven't seen exactly how this is going to happen.
Thank you, Jerry. And I'll leave the final word on this to Anna then, please.
Yeah, thank you. My answer was also more funding, which is not related to the policy, but now I have also one important thing that I need that to be said. And that is actually the importance of education about AI literacy and AI ethics. I think that should be also somehow encouraged and included in many policies about focus on AI. So education of teachers, researchers, who then further teach young students and children.
Thank you. I think I'd encourage you also to look at the AI and science strategy that came out on the 8th of October, because there was 4 pillars to this. One is a better environment for AI and science. One is about computer capacity, so these gigafactories. One is about better use of data. But then the 4th one is also about talent around AI. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that if you have an opportunity. So it's the AI and science strategy. But with that, thank you so much. I'd like to thank our 4 speakers once again. Jerry Spinakis from Maastricht University, Anna from the University of Rijeka, Lars Eilo from UIT, the Arctic University of Norway, and Eva from the University of Zagreb. I think this was a very interesting webinar, and I thank you all so much for your input. I'd like to just point you towards, that you can see on your screen now, there's emails there, so feel free to reach out for collaboration, for any more questions or input. Also, the YERUN contacts are there, so please sign up for our newsletter and find us on LinkedIn, and feel free to browse our website as well if you haven't either. But with that, I think that's the end of our webinar. So thank you so much to everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.